We've got some shockers for you today. You know, you see these guys that take these dogs from the pound, they call them rescue dogs. A guy in Jackson, Tennessee got a rescue Rottweiler. Ooh. And he'd only been in that shelter for 5 days. They hadn't tested him, they hadn't done blood work on him, they hadn't done anything on him. So the guy takes him home. He's a Rottweiler. Guess what?
Did he bite somebody?
Killed him. He didn't bite him, he killed him. Man's dead. The man who took him out of the rescue place? 56-year-old man dead because the Rottweiler killed him. I would recommend folks that, I know all these stories about pit bulls and parolees and what nice little dogs they are and all this, but you get one that's been trained to fight, and those rascals, they've got I think about 1,700 pounds of torque on their jaws, and it's really terrible. You know, the other thing, I'm looking at some of these news things, and guess what the headline was? Charlie Sheen has AIDS. Yeah. Did you see that?
I did.
Big headlines. More important than Paris or anything. Yeah. Big.
Well, and actually, I mean, you know, Charlie's been in the news so much over past years,
well,
and not usually positively.
Who knows? Maybe this may be the time he'll come to the Lord. Well, okay. Well, even in the face of the murderous attacks in Paris, President Obama still says his strategy is working. Which planet does he live on? And guess what? He called those brutal slaughters in Paris a, quote, setback. It wasn't a setback. It was the beginning of a war, or a continuation of it. And while the president of France says it's an act of war, our president says it's a, quote, setback.
Well, the man who was President Obama's head of the Defense Intelligence Agency has a warning. The White House is underestimating the deadly ambitions of Islamic terrorists, and he says the president's policy has failed. George Thomas has the story.
Retired General Michael Flynn has seen the face of radical Islam up close.
I will tell you, strategically, they are very savvy, they're very cunning, and they have the willingness to win.
General Flynn was President Obama's top man at the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Before that, the general served as Director of Intelligence for the Joint Special Operations Command, a shadowy arm of the government that tracks and eliminates terrorists around the world. The same unit, by the way, was responsible for the Commander raid that killed Osama bin Laden.
For the better half of a decade, Flynn has interrogated hundreds of Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorists.
The strategic leaders, they're not 25-year-old kids. These are like people that are, I would say, between the age of like 45 and 55, who are engineers, doctors, very intelligent. They should have better things to do, but they have this ingrained belief, and they mean to not only establish the caliphate, but dominate the world.
He says the Paris attacks serve as a reminder that the threat is unlikely to fade, and the sooner we understand that, the better.
So we have to get real, and this war that we are in, whether we like it or not, whether we accept the fact that we're in it or not, it is here in front of us.
On Monday, President Obama called the terror attacks in Paris a setback in the fight against ISIS, but is unwilling to send troops to Syria.
It is not just my view, but the view of my closest military and civilian advisors, that would be a mistake.
Flynn sees the real mistake as a White House that continues to underestimate the enemy and their religious ambitions. The general says Obama cannot win this war if he can't even name the enemy.
They see themselves as a component of Islam. This is a political ideology based on a religion. And we lost World War II to the Nazis. We'd be praying at the altar of Nazism today.
Flynn believes it's time the president and the world wake up, because what happened in Paris is the new norm, and we will see more of it.
This administration and the people that are around the president are poorly advising him on the kinds of things that we are facing, the type of enemy that we are facing.
In August 2014, Flynn was forced out of his job at the Defense Intelligence Agency for, among other things, his position that the Islamic terrorist threat was growing around the world and not receding like the administration wanted the public to believe.
And sadly, when the president says something, everybody else that's in our government has to sort of toe the line. Otherwise, you've got to leave the government, because if you can't toe the line, you're out. then you're looking at a guy that's out.
A registered Democrat, Flynn worries the Paris attacks are only fueling ISIS's recruiting and funding operations.
In under 3 weeks, General, ISIS has managed to blow up a Russian airliner, send suicide bombers into Lebanon, Baghdad, and now Paris. What does that tell you about their ambitions outside of Syria and Iraq?
Yeah, their ambitions are high. They believe they are winning. They are recruiting every time they do these operations.
4 years ago, the Islamic State did not exist. Now it controls vast swaths of Syria and Iraq, and 35 terror groups around the world have pledged allegiance to its leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Flynn says we owe it to future generations to put a stop to this evil.
We've got to quit kidding ourselves, and the President of the United States needs to recognize that the absolutely failed policy that has been implemented by this administration to do anything about this is not absolutely, it's not achieving the mission.
George Thomas, CBN News.
Man, that's from a man who knows. That gentleman, General Flynn, knows what he's talking about, defense intelligence. That's what his business was, to find out what the enemy thinks. And he got fired because he was telling the truth. It's shocking. I'm glad Senator Feinstein was on the air the other day saying ISIS is not contained, but that's what the president said, it's contained. And this thing in Paris was a minor, so was not a minor, but a setback. The whole thing is just bizarre. You ask yourself, in what planet, as I said, he's living on, and it's really very dangerous. But they're telling the truth, and the word is getting out, whether the president likes it or not, because we've got to be aware of who the enemy is. But they talk about airstrikes. We're flying about 15 sorties a day, that's all. And I understand that if they have ordnance on board that might harm any innocent civilian anywhere, then the planes have got to return to the base and offload their cargoes. So we're just picking away at it, and there's no way air power alone is going to take over. It's got to be on the ground, and we've got to recognize it's going to take some sacrifice. Well, you can see more of George's interview with General Flynn on CBN News. Well, there's something else, ladies and gentlemen, that I want to tell you about we've got on this program. A few months ago, I saw and read of the grisly details of what's called female genital mutilation. And I remember reading in Hersey Alley's book, Infidel, about what happened to her, and it was pretty graphic. But it's not nearly as graphic as what's being done right here in America to innocent girls. And it's time that we know what the story is. So this is something that's coming up on this program. I warn you, it may be a little shocking, but you need to know what's happening so we can put a stop to it. Well, France is launching more airstrikes against the terrorists of ISIS in Syria, and they're ruthlessly hunting down possible terrorists at home. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau. Here's John.
That's right, Pat. French authorities are showing just how serious they are in the war against terror, with wiretaps, searches without warrants, and much more. But will it be enough to stop radicalized jihadis from striking again? Gary Lane has this report from Paris.
Addressing a joint session of Parliament, French President Hollande said his country is at war. He's extending a state of emergency for another 3 months and pledges to continue the nationwide crackdown on Islamic sleeper cells, like the one responsible for last Friday's horrific attack in Paris. He also wants to strip citizenship from any Frenchman involved in terrorism, so-called homegrown terrorists. The Eiffel Tower is lit once again, this time in the French tricolors. That wasn't the case over the weekend. For 3 nights it went dark, almost a depiction of the darkness that had descended on the City of Light. Parisians are struggling to return to normal, and they can't help wondering if their government has a long-term strategy to defeat Islamic terrorism once and for all. This Parisian told us he's concerned about how the sweeping security crackdown may affect innocent citizens.
What I fear is the consequences of all that on our lifestyle, on the way safety will be enforced in our country, in our countries.
For now, it means warrantless searches and wiretaps for suspected terrorists, and perhaps more police on the streets and routine security checks. Meanwhile, in Syria Sunday night, France dropped 20 bombs on the ISIS capital of Raqqa. While the French termed it a massive response, some military experts say that alone will not deter the Islamic State from continuing its holy war against the West. CBN News told you late last summer that ISIS warned it had sent 4,000 jihadists to infiltrate the ranks of the thousands of migrants that poured into Europe each day. This Muslim migrant in Sweden feared the Swedes weren't doing enough to protect the country from potential terrorists.
Before letting them settle here, the Swedish government should check Facebook and use other means to determine if these refugees were fighters in Syria or Iraq.
One likely result of this terrorist attack is that some European borders may remain closed, especially to the masses of Middle Eastern migrants that are sweeping in. But for France, a country with a large and easily radicalized youthful Muslim population, the latest measures may be too little, too late. Gary Lane, CBN News, Paris.
Thanks, Gary. Russia's Federal Security Service is offering a $50 million reward for information leading to the arrest of those behind the downing of a Russian jetliner over Egypt. President Vladimir Putin vows to hunt them down after Russian security leaders confirmed that a homemade bomb placed on board caused the plane to break up in the air. All 224 passenger and crew were killed. Well, more than half of the country's governors say they don't want Syrian refugees in their states. That's after a Syrian passport was found near the body of one of the Paris attackers. The Obama administration plans to admit 10,000 Syrian refugees next year, and the federal government, not the states, will have the final word on the immigration issue. Almost all of the objecting governors are Republicans, including John Kasich of Ohio. And a reminder, Pat will be interviewing Governor Kasich tomorrow at Regent University. You can see highlights of that conversation on Thursday's 700 Club. And Friday, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul will be on the 700 Club as part of our series of interviews with the presidential candidates. And Pat, I know you're looking forward to your interview with Governor Kasich.
He's a super guy. He's been a friend of mine for years and years. His mother used to tell him to watch the 700 Club, so the guy has been appropriately vetted. He had to watch this program whether he wanted to or not. So he's a good friend. I'm sure the success he's had in Ohio is because of watching this show.
Surely that's it.